The verdict is in. Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of the most serious charges, racketeering and sex trafficking, on July 2, 2025, inside the federal courthouse in Manhattan. The world held its breath. For weeks, testimonies had piled up, revelations had flooded in, and the public braced itself to witness the fall of an empire. But instead, what came was a silent slap. The most feared charge, the one under the RICO Act, typically used to bring down major criminal organizations, was dismissed. The core of the case crumbled. Instead, the jury settled on two lesser offenses: crimes related to the transportation of individuals for the purpose of prostitution. Serious, yes, but nowhere near the life sentence Diddy was facing had he been convicted under RICO. For these secondary charges, he now faces a maximum of 10 years per count. But realistically, given his financial resources and influence, few truly believe he'll ever serve real prison time. In the courtroom, shock quickly gave way to anger. The plaintiffs' faces remained expressionless. In the overflow room, filled with journalists, observers, and loved ones, the murmurs turned into a heavy silence. No applause, no visible emotion, just the overwhelming sense that something vital had slipped through the hands of the justice system. And for good reason. This verdict raises far more disturbing questions than it answers. This is not just about a man being partially convicted. It's about understanding how, despite the gravity of the accusations, the volume of testimony, and the media firestorm, such a case deflated to the point where the most crucial charge was simply abandoned. From the first hearings, some observers saw it coming. The government's case was fragile. The prosecution relied on only two predicate acts, the bare minimum required to trigger RICO proceedings. 2. That's legal but risky. No strong financial evidence, no mapped-out criminal network, no clear links connecting the alleged events to an organized enterprise. Just isolated stories, powerful emotions, yes, but legally, not enough. Worse, no co-conspirators were ever officially named, no alleged associates, no supposed members of a structured group. As if in a crime modeled after organized crime, one man alone could hold up the entire structure. And that's not all. The charges didn't name a single accomplice, administrator, celebrity, or influential witness. Names that often came up in rumors were carefully left out. It felt like a trial gutted from the inside, deliberately stripped of what might have made it solid. This strategy sparks a troubling question. Why build such a fragile case for such a high-profile trial? Why weren't more witnesses called? Why weren't insiders brought in to testify? Why weren't the recordings, known to exist, used? Why was the prosecution reduced to its bare bones when the case clearly pointed to more than just one man's abuse of power? Throughout the trial, the same question echoed in the courtroom and on social media. Where was the evidence? Where were the images, the documents, the physical proof to support such serious charges? No videos, even though multiple residences and hotels Diddy frequented were known to have security cameras. No audio recordings, despite past confessions from close insiders. No text messages, no emails, no suspicious bank transfers. Nothing, or barely anything. Sure, two women came forward and testified with courage. Two former partners. Two very different stories, but two voices that carried the weight of the case on their own. The first, met when she was still a teenager, spoke of slow-building control, repeated abuse, and deep psychological isolation. She described an atmosphere of intimate terror, a daily life under domination. Her words, though painful, came across as clear, consistent, restrained. The second woman divided public opinion, also a former partner, but one who remained close to Diddy well after the events she denounced. She allegedly continued to benefit from his financial support and even went back to him several times. This ambiguity confused the public. Some saw it as a sign of inconsistency. Others saw it as proof of ongoing psychological control, of toxic bonds that defy logic. But ultimately, that very duality blurred the message. Instead of exposing a structured system, the case was reduced to a battle of personal stories. The prosecution failed to link the testimonies to a broader mechanism of abuse or show a repeating pattern coordinated by a network. It relied on two individual paths, but never painted the bigger picture expected from a RICO trial. The result? Powerful stories, treated as isolated incidents. And faced with that, the defense barely had to move. That was another striking feature of this trial, the cold, calculated posture of Diddy's legal team. Not a single witness called, no counter-investigation, no theatrical strategy, just procedural motions, technical reminders, and targeted objections on evidence admissibility. Their strength? Letting the jury feel, on their own, that the government had no real case. There was no need to counterattack because the case was collapsing all by itself. This strategic passivity became a demonstration in itself, not a moral victory, but a tactical one. The defense quietly highlighted the fragility of the case. No need to persuade. They simply let the opposing side exhaust itself into irrelevance until the inevitable verdict. And meanwhile, other names, other facts, other investigative leads were kept carefully out of sight. As if behind closed doors, an invisible framework had been laid out to define what the trial was allowed to reveal. Limits drawn from the start. Silences repeated so often, they ended up making more noise than any speech. Some observers don't just see this as a failed trial, but as a staged performance, a courtroom drama whose boundaries were set ahead of time, designed to capture public attention without triggering a full-scale detonation. A controlled operation where a few revelations are allowed, but never the most damaging ones. Certain names circulated, but only outside the courthouse walls. One woman in particular, a discreet figure in Diddy's circle, had reportedly managed his travel, his business affairs, and according to multiple sources, played a key role in organizing his private parties. Yet she was never called to testify. Not one question, not one mention. Her absence, like that of several high-profile figures, spoke volumes about the unspoken limits placed on this trial. Why these blind spots? Why so much caution? Why the refusal to open certain doors? Perhaps because behind the Diddy case lies something deeper, a web of relationships, influence, and exchanged silences, bought for stability. Several commentators speculated, without being able to prove it, about the existence of compromising videos, footage captured in private residences, sensitive recordings used as blackmail. If such material truly exists, its power extends far beyond the scope of this courtroom. At this point, it's hard not to think of other cases. Jeffrey Epstein, for instance. The same pattern. Serious allegations. Famous names whispered. Ties to powerful people. But a trial that never quite gets to the truth. A justice system that plays it safe. Closed files. Forgotten witnesses. Silenced connections. A familiar script where a few visible figures are sacrificed to protect the whole. Because the Diddy trial can't be viewed in isolation. It's part of a larger trend, a growing list of cases where the most influential celebrities seem shielded by a system too timid to confront them directly. Justice retreats, evidence vanishes, and the world keeps spinning. The show goes on, the powerful remain standing, and in the meantime, the victims fade into the background. Their stories are lost in media noise, their pain reduced to a passing headline, quickly replaced by the next scandal. They are the great absentees from the verdict. They carried the case, but the justice system did not speak for them. The final verdict left a bitter taste, Officially, the justice system followed its course. Officially, an independent jury decided. But to many, this feels less like a conclusion and more like surrender. Behind this decision lies a broader truth, a system still unable or unwilling to confront those with wealth, power, and the right connections. Diddy won't be convicted on the most serious charges. He escapes a life sentence. He avoids the stigma of a RICO conviction. And though he remains technically guilty of 2 prostitution-related offenses, no one seriously believes he'll serve meaningful jail time. Too rich, too famous, too well-connected. The imbalance is glaring. An ordinary citizen facing the same charges would likely have been jailed from the very first complaint. They'd have awaited trial behind bars. No press conferences, no army of high-profile lawyers, no media influence to shape public opinion. But here, the justice machine, so often ruthless with the vulnerable, suddenly appeared hesitant, timid, almost indulgent. So this is no longer just about a man on trial. It's about a 2-tiered system where fame acts as a shield, a system where public image sometimes matters more than facts, where power protects better than truth. And that realization, more than a judicial scandal, is a warning sign for society at large. Because this trial isn't an isolated episode. It shines a light on a far deeper pattern, how society continues to protect those who shine, even when their shadows run deep. We forgive, we excuse, we forget, as long as they're rich, attractive, influential. Meanwhile, others, ruined by far lesser accusations, see their lives destroyed with no chance of rebuilding. This is no longer just about guilt or innocence. It's about privilege, what some people can do or make disappear simply because they have the power to shape outcomes. And this verdict, far from closing a chapter, opens much deeper questions about what we accept and what we condone sometimes with our silence. In the middle of all this disillusionment, one truth remains. We must not look away. We must not resign ourselves. We must not let moral fatigue turn outrage into background noise, because fame should never grant immunity, because a polished public image should never erase accountability. This verdict was supposed to be a turning point. It was meant to be the climax of years of rumors, hidden pain, buried trauma. It should have been the moment justice finally stood tall against power. But instead, silence won. A heavy, organized, almost institutional silence. For the victims, it's another wound, a harsh reminder that the institutions meant to protect them can also abandon them, that the fight to be heard is long, painful, and sometimes futile. And for those watching from afar, doubting, questioning, there remains one responsibility: not to forget. Because even when the courts fall silent, the facts remain. Even when the accused are cleared, the victims still carry their scars. And even when the system fails, collective memory endures. A memory we must keep alive, against erasure, against indifference, against the spectacle that swallows everything. The trial is over, but the questions have only just begun.